Welcome to At Issue. I'm H. Wayne Wilson. The state of Illinois now has a budget after more than 2 years of going without. Now the stumbling block is, are we going to fund schools? And that remains a question as we tape this program. But we don't want to talk about the specifics too much of the budget or the school financing. We want to talk about the process, the act of legislating in the state of Illinois. And we have two experts to talk about that, long-time observers and participants in state government. First, let me introduce Jim Nolan. Jim is an aide to 3 former Illinois governors.
Unindicted governors.
So you worked for unindicted governors.
Yes,
okay,
yes.
Good. Then we can continue the program now. And a former candidate for lieutenant governor, a former state legislator, just an observer of Springfield. Another observer of Springfield, Mike Lawrence. He's done it from newspaper reporting, he's done it as press secretary to Jim Edgar, and he's done it as the retired director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute down in Carbondale. Welcome both of you to At Issue.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So I guess we'll start with the school funding issue. Mike, could you just describe where we're at with that? I mean, we have a budget and everyone says, oh, a sigh of relief. And now here's a new problem. Where are we with that? And then we'll talk about how we got into this situation.
Well, I wish I knew exactly where we are at.
I don't know that anyone knows.
And where we're going, but essentially there was a potential to do something about school funding in Illinois in terms of the structure of it to help out the have-nots among school districts. And there had not been a significant advance on that issue for a couple of decades. And a bill did pass both houses of the legislature. There were some differences between the two parties on them, but Governor Rauner vetoed the bill. He used his mandatory veto power, and now there's a question, even though we have a budget that includes funds for education, this bill that is now in contest needs to, something positive needs to happen or an alternative in order to trigger the funding for the school. So just to get to the bottom line, I think there's a danger of disruption to the school. And I think the feeling is most of the local school districts can start the year, but there's a real question about the long-term prospect.
The legislature has 15 days to either approve the mandatory veto or to override the mandatory veto. They're not scheduled to meet again in August, at least not in regular session. And the mandatory veto addresses the issue of some extra money, if I may call it that, to Chicago Public Schools. So are they getting extra? I mean, no one knows. Let's start the conversation with this. Chicago has a separate retirement fund for their public schools than the rest of the state. And that seems to be at the core of the problem.
They pay their own pension obligations on behalf of their own school district. Other school districts across the state have their pension obligations paid for by the state of Illinois. This is about who gets what, H, and that's what politics is about. The Chicago Public Schools are not well managed. They're deep in debt, and they feel they should garner a bit more out of the state this year than Rauner feels. And Rauner feels that he can negotiate by his veto, that he has some negotiating power with the Chicago politicos and that in return, maybe for some additional money for the Chicago schools, he can maybe get part of his turnaround agenda that the Democrats have been resistant to work on, such as workers' comp reforms and related business-friendly changes.
So that opens up the conversation to let's leave the educational aspect alone for right now, because we don't know where that's going. But how did we get in this fix where we seem to be in a stance where the Republicans more or less line up over in this trench, the Democrats line up in this trench, and the art of compromise has disappeared. The art of legislating is no longer in existence from my perspective. How did we end up here?
Well, I think over time we've seen a transition from having a season to campaign and a season to govern. When I first started covering Illinois politics back in the 1960s, not the 1860s, you had the campaigns, they were hard fought, but then there was a sense, now we got to solve problems. And now the campaign season never ends. And complicating matters, in my view, is the fact that the legislative districts are drawn in such a way that legislators who, most of whom worry a lot about re-election, and may be their number one priority, are more concerned about primaries than they are about general elections, which means that the Democrats are worried about a challenge from the left, or if they're viewed as consorting, if you will, with Republicans, Republicans are worried about challenges from the right or being accused of being too friendly to Democrats. Well, you don't get things done without compromise. Compromise, to many people, has become a dirty word, but it's how you get things done. And it's interesting because people want things to get done. They want services. They want schools funded. They want schools funded in a fair way, and they're reacting, though negatively, to ways that gets done.
Can I suggest another aspect of this, and that's money? Because we've already seen evidence of this. If you don't toe the line with where Governor Rauner is, he has lots of money. $50 million of his own money went into the campaign war chest last year alone.
And he's committed another 100 to 150 million. This is going to be the most expensive state cycle of campaigns in American history, because you have Rauner, a billionaire, or I assume he's close to a billionaire, and possibly a candidate on the other side in J.B. Pritzker, a billionaire whose money makes Rauner's money look like chump change, and the two of them are likely to spend money that is unprecedented. When I ran for the legislature in a contested race back almost half a century ago, I spent the equivalent in today's money of $40,000. And I have some former students who have just run for the legislature in this past cycle, and they spent $2 million. And so that's a sense of the difference in the amounts of money.
And it's outside money sometimes that, it used to be that you ran your campaign, you spent your $40,000, and you espoused your positions. Now, the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or Mike Madigan, Bruce Rauner say, we're going to run a campaign against you because you didn't toe the line. The money has become too important.
Yeah, it's a huge factor, and that begs the question of what do you do about it? Well, the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, has held that you can't limit what a candidate puts into a race, particularly his or her own money. So you have very wealthy people who are running and able to put virtually unlimited resources in. And through the years, even before Rauner showed up, legislative leaders gained a lot of influence, power over their members, because they were raising money to run legislative campaigns and also providing the staff and the expertise to run those campaigns. And part of this, is again, I'm reluctant to talk about the good old days because there were problems then, but part of it is you had part-time legislators back then, and they weren't dependent on their legislative positions. And now you have full-time legislators for the most part. They're professional legislators, just like members of Congress. And you can say, well, the way to change that would be through term limits, and some people feel strongly in favor of term limits. But there are downsides to that as well. There are states that have adopted term limits where people are not that happy with the results.
Nebraska being one of them.
Yeah.
They have 2 4-year term limits, and what happens is the bureaucrats are making the decisions instead of the elected officials because they don't have any
exactly.
experience.
I think a factor in this present climate is that Governor Rauner decided a few years ago that the problems of Illinois have become so severe, the pension underfunding, the public union dominance of management of state government, that he had to blow up the system, not work within it. That is, to force the Democrats to knuckle under to his demands, even though they have 3/5 to 2/3 majorities in the legislative bodies, but that he felt and feels that he has to force them to knuckle under. And so he has brought, as Mike was suggesting, he's brought campaigning inside governance, which is relatively new. When I was a backbench legislator, we campaigned in order to get into government, where we would try to make policies according to our respective values. Now, the inside the government actions are predicated on how they're going to affect the campaign. So it's a much more complicated and convoluted process than we used to have.
And it's interesting. Early in the Rauner administration, you heard a lot of talk about, well, Indiana did this, Wisconsin did this. Well, and they had Republican governors. They also had Republican legislatures. And Rauner came into a situation, and basically what is still a blue state, he had veto-proof majorities, Democrat majorities to deal with. And when you're in that situation, you got to decide, do I want to get things done? And if I do, should I look at doing it incrementally instead of blowing up the system? Now, he decided, and I agree with Jim, that the option would be, if you want to get it done, blow up the system. The problem is you've got state universities in Illinois really hurting. You've got a social service network that has been frazzled by this, and it's the kind of thing where even if we get things back on track, it's going to take probably decades to recover from the damage that's been done, and real people are suffering as a result of this.
Well, let's take that point and let's look to the future. You both have been inside and long-term observers of Illinois government. In general, where might we go to solve some of these problems? I think we're well aware now that we've got pension problems, we've got all sorts of problems, but where do we go?
we probably go to a position where you have neither Rauner nor Madigan in place. I think Governor Rauner has been successful politically in making Madigan kind of the poster child for all of the problems the state has developed in recent years, and he's been there for half a century. And
he is the longest serving Speaker of the House in the nation's
and he's
history.
been in the legislature since the Constitutional Convention of 1969 and 70. So the two of them are now personally committed to blocking the other rather than compromising, as Mike suggests is necessary. And it may be we will see this impasse continue until one or both are out of office. And of course, that's Rauner's objective, to drive the Democrats from their majority position. He's made a modest amount of gain in that regard in the last election in terms of turning some Democrat seats Republican, but it'll take 2 or 3 more cycles of that kind, election cycles of that kind of gain, for him to achieve that objective. Would you say that's the ballpark?
I don't think that's a real a likely outcome. Anyway, you know, my sense, H, is that part of the answer here and a big part of it has to come from the outside. It's got to come from the outside of that Capitol building. And that means corporate community, people, labor interests, a whole, people in higher education, a whole gamut of people, and a very diverse group need to get involved in this, because I don't think we can solve these issues, whether you're talking about the tax structure in Illinois, whether you're talking about what higher education ought to look like, what that system ought to look like. You can't do it effectively on a piecemeal basis, particularly given where Illinois is today. I'm sorry to say this, Illinois is going backwards. It really is. And I grew up in this state right down the road in Galesburg, and I love this state, but it's going backwards. And it sickens me to see what's happened. And I'm not sure that the capacity and the capability or even the inclination is there in the State House with the governor and the legislature to do something. Now, ultimately, they have to be part of getting it done. But I think we need a much more comprehensive look, and we got to get a lot more people in this state engaged in looking down the road.
You mentioned process earlier, H. Illinois state government has never looked ahead. There's never been any strategic thinking of a comprehensive sort that Mike's talking about, any long-term planning that local governments and their communities do as standard operating procedure. And it's a fascinating failure of a state that it looks to the next month or to the next 15 days and whether the veto is going to be overridden rather than 5 years down the pike. We have great strengths in this state and we're not leveraging them.
So rather than crisis management, we need a long-term look, but as Mike suggested, has the state gotten to that point where the manufacturing community and the small business community and the unions and the school system and everybody kind of gets together in some capacity, I don't know what that would be, and say, here's what we want, and prod the legislature?
Well, I remember I wrote an op-ed piece a few years ago where I suggested that the public policy institutes in the state, and I I was referring primarily to those based at the state universities, bring together various interests, and I'll use the word interest, but we're talking about people who have a lot at stake in Illinois and in the future of Illinois, and bring them together. And I think people in the legislature and in the executive branch can be part of that, but you've got to have a much broader group. Well, I'd say that op-ed piece got an underwhelming response, but you know, I really feel strongly that the crisis is so profound right now that we need extraordinary action. And I have also found through the years that if you can get people to the table, get them meeting, they find out they have a lot more in common than differences. And particularly if the attitude and the atmosphere is we need to solve problems, we need to look ahead, and we need to take a longer view and get beyond our own individual interests. Now that may sound like pie in the sky, and maybe it is, but what's the alternative here?
And there are illustrations. In the early 1900s, the Civic Committee of the Commercial Club of Chicago created the Burnham Plan for the development of the beautiful lakefront and the parks and the wide avenues of Chicago, something that continues to benefit the central city of Chicago. And then we have the 2018 bicentennial coming up. That could be a handle for drawing the kinds of CEOs and labor leaders and others together to say to Speaker Madigan and Governor Rauner and others that, look, if you won't sit down, and they don't sit down together to look ahead and solve our problems, we're going to take up the cudgels and come up with some thinking of our own and do what we can to impose it on the process.
Imposing it on the process might be difficult. It seems that outside influences might, and you're right, getting these organizations together, but the rating agencies are threatening junk bond status. We have the pension fund, $130 billion. In
251 billion, says Moody's.
Moody's says
Financial
251.
investor.
I can't even-
$20,000 per person in Illinois.
How do you dig out from underneath
Well,
that?
that's our challenge. Yeah.
So, you said the op-ed piece got underwhelming response,
yeah.
but have we gotten to that stage where the legislature has really found themselves, they've painted themselves into a corner, and it's time for the citizens to step forward and govern the state, so to speak?
Well, I think they have to, let's say, help govern it, and we have to do something to deal with the toxic atmosphere that we have in the State House. And if you get people engaged from various areas and various sectors, plus we need to do a much better job of getting citizens engaged and really getting them to understand the scope of the problem here and the depth of the problem. We polled a few years ago at the Simon Institute when I was there as director, and there have been subsequent polls by the Institute, where the majority of Illinoisans say we can cut our way out of this situation. But then you have majorities also say, don't cut education, don't cut public aid, don't cut corrections. And basically they're ruling out cuts in over 95% of the state budget, and
Cut-
see
cut-
if we can cut our
Cut
way
somebody
out.
else's program, but don't cut mine.
Yeah.
But in terms of involving the public, it sounds like Mike is suggesting that we actually have a democratic process take place.
Yeah, a kind of an informal, extra-governmental process of some sort. I think Minnesota has a much stronger civic tradition than Illinois statewide, and they bring civic groups into coalitions to force the legislators to do things. We don't have that tradition, but Mike is saying we have to start.
And with that positive note, maybe we'll see some of that happen in Illinois. I'd like to say thank you to Jim Nolan, who is an aide to 3 governors of the state of Illinois. Unindicted. And to Mike Lawrence, the retired director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute down in Carbondale. Thank you both for being on that issue. We appreciate it. We're going to talk politics again in 2 weeks when we have Sherry Bustos, the congresswoman from the Quad Cities and representing parts of Peoria, on At Issue. Join us then.